Good morning. Welcome to the United States Sports Academy and our weekly sports talk program. We apologize for being a few minutes late this morning, but you have to remember we are a university, and we had a student do his final dissertation defense at 10 o'clock this morning. And Dr. Simmermacher, who is his chair, is going to join us here in a few seconds. Obviously, the student's dissertation defense had to be our first priority. So anyway, last week we talked about what we thought would happen based on the conference championship games leading up to the final championship playoff picture, and we kind of hit that one on the head. If Clemson and Alabama won, well, we figured it'd be Clemson, Alabama, Oklahoma, and the winner of the Michigan State and Iowa game, which actually a pretty good game.
Great game. Yes.
So, just in general, what are your impressions of the events of last week?
Well, I thought things went kind of like everybody expected. I didn't think the Michigan State-Iowa game was going to be as close as it really was, but it turned out as everybody expected that Michigan State was going to eventually win that ball game.
Yeah, I agree. It was a great weekend of football, but again, the committee had a very peaceful Saturday. They didn't have to worry much about debates or controversies. I think the biggest thing is, again, the Big 12 doesn't have a championship game. It worked out in their favor this year, but I think moving forward they really have to consider putting in a championship game, because that 13th game, while it didn't hurt them this year, it could in the future, as it did last year.
Yeah, and did you see what their commissioner, the new rule they put into place yesterday?
The 10-team rule?
They can only play one non-FBS. FCS, Division One. They can only play one FCS school, and one of their non-conference games has to be against another Power 5 school.
It's probably a good idea.
Yeah. Oklahoma, you can't say anything about Oklahoma. They played Tennessee this year at Tennessee, and they got them in Oklahoma next year. So at least Oklahoma went out there. Baylor's non-conference schedule was putrid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no other way around it. And
for the record, I think one other thing that has to change, because it would have thrown a big curveball into this, is if Notre Dame beat Stanford.
Good point. Yeah.
Now you got two conferences that aren't going. I think either Notre Dame needs to get in a conference, or they need to be out of the picture. I know they're a big hitter in college football, but there's only three schools that are independents anymore.
Yeah.
Them, BYU, and Army. That's it.
Well, and just imagine
something has to change.
Notre Dame destroyed Texas, and Oklahoma lost to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine Sunday figuring out between Notre Dame and Oklahoma which of those teams would have gone as that 4 seed? That would have been a fun argument.
Sure,
it would have been. And what do you think of Michigan State jumping over Oklahoma into the number 3 spot?
Well, and I think that came down to the conference championship issue.
I agree.
Oklahoma being them, not playing in a conference championship, catapulted Michigan State right over them.
I know they'll never say this, and
Yeah.
I know you and I agree on this, but I think that the NCAA and the committee want to see Alabama and Oklahoma in the championship game. That's the number one reason why Michigan State ended up the number 3 seed. And I don't care what Jeff Long says. That's the real reason. Okay, so one of the things we did, and we actually did a show on this about 4 months ago, 3 months ago. We did a 2015 United States Sports Academy preseason football poll, and there was 8 of us that participated in that poll, and we ranked the top 25 teams. And to no one's surprise, the 8 of us, along with every other football person on the planet, had Ohio State number 1.
Yeah.
As far as this wonderful group here goes. Clemson being the number 1 seed, Ben had Clemson at number 11. I had him at number 9. Brett had him at number 14. So, but I will say at least I had Clemson number 9. But if you look at the big picture of things, Brett was the obvious winner because you got 3 of the
two of the teams? 2 of the 4,
and all 4 of Brett's teams were in the top 14. And probably the least successful prognosticator of the 3 of us sitting up here was yours truly. And by the way, you don't need to adjust your TV sets. I am wearing a pink shirt. It's not salmon or any of them other fancy words people use to describe pink shirts. It is pink, and it's okay. I can live with it. Ben's preseason top four were Ohio State, Auburn, Michigan State, and TCU. And he had Clemson at 11, Alabama at 5, Michigan State at 3, and Oklahoma at 16. So he had Michigan State was his one team, and he had Alabama right there on the edge. Brett had his preseason top four was Ohio State, TCU, Alabama, and Michigan State. So he had 2 in, and he had Oklahoma ranked number 12 and Clemson ranked number 14. So he had all 4 of his teams in the top 14. Myself, I had my preseason top 4 was Ohio State, Auburn, USC, and Oregon. I still believe that USC and Oregon are 2 of the best 4 teams in the country, but they all have multiple losses because they play in a real conference, the Pac-12. These Big Ten guys on my side, and I'm surrounded by SEC guys. They probably would
you
disagree with that.
You have to think that the Big Ten guys are correct. Even Paul Feinbaum said the Big Ten was the best conference this year.
What is Paul Feinbaum?
Just throwing that out there.
We've got a lot more viewers than Paul.
He's an SEC
through and through.
And he finally admitted.
But you ever listen to Booger McFarland?
No.
Yeah, Booger McFarland's a Mississippi State guy. He's a diehard SEC guy, and he even said this year that if you look at that game on Saturday, if Florida was really the best team in the SEC East wasn't very. They had 3 yards of total offense in the second and third quarters combined.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That was pretty brutal. So
the question is Alabama's defense that good or their offense just that bad?
Well, I think Kevin Skarbinski, our local writer, summed it up very well last year after the championship game when he said, "Why does Ohio State have 3 quarterbacks better than any quarterback in the SEC?" There are no quarterbacks in the SEC, and that's why the defenses tend to look good. Okay, so we got 2 semifinal games. Number 1 versus 4, Clemson and Oklahoma, and number 2 versus 3, Alabama and Michigan State. What do you guys see happening in those 2 semifinal games?
I know that people are going to hate me for saying this, but I'm going to stick with the Big Ten, and I'm going with Michigan State over Alabama, and I think Oklahoma's going to beat Clemson.
Again, I love the Big Ten, but Alabama's looked really tough this year. I think if Derrick Henry runs the ball like he has the last few weeks, I think Alabama's going to win that one. I like Oklahoma over Clemson as well. So Alabama, Oklahoma in the championship.
You didn't listen to Dr. Butler. There's no quarterbacks in the SEC.
It's true.
Connor Cook is one of the top quarterbacks.
I like Michigan State over Alabama, and I think Oklahoma's going to win, but I will admit that of the 4 teams, I'm rooting for Clemson. So let's say that let's assume for a second that your predictions come true. Who do you think will win the championship?
I think Oklahoma's going to win the national championship.
I'll go Alabama.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go Clemson just because that's what I'm rooting for. I think the winner of the Clemson-Oklahoma game will win the national championship. By the way, on ESPN's Football Power Index, the team with the highest probability of winning the championship is Oklahoma, who for some reason is the number 4 seed. Oh yeah, we already figured that one out. And all the focus in the last couple of days since they came out with their final thing, and again, we all agree that their job was actually pretty easy on Sunday morning. All the focus has been on the semifinals and the championship game. So what other bowl games are you guys looking forward to watching this year?
Obviously, the Fiesta Bowl with Ohio State, playing Notre Dame, the 2 big money schools. We'll see who can come out on top in that one. Not much else from my end. I mean, I look forward to that game more than any.
I look forward to Ohio State, Notre Dame. I want to see how Michigan does against Florida. That's a big Big Ten SEC matchup. And then being an Indiana fan, we've got Indiana versus Duke in the Pinstripe Bowl. And as someone put it on social media, you've got 2 basketball schools playing a football game in a baseball stadium.
There you go.
That's true. And, one of the things that, because of the alliances, there's always quite a few New Year's Day. I think both of the bowl games in Florida on New Year's Day are Big Ten SEC matchups. And that's the way it usually is because of the alliances. But we've got 4 of them this year. We've got Penn State versus Georgia. We've got Tennessee versus
Northwestern.
We've got Florida versus Michigan, and then we've got that other one, Michigan State, Alabama. Some people might be interested in that, but it'll be interesting to see. You know, last year, halfway through the season, 3 of the teams from the SEC West were ranked in the top 4 of the championship series: Alabama, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. And everybody was talking about the SEC West last year as being maybe one of the strongest divisions in the history of college football. And then they got spanked in the bowls. Mm-hmm. All of them: Alabama, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Ole Miss got crushed. I believe it was TCU, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got crushed. So it'll be interesting to see. There's some good matchups. I think one of the interesting games is going to be Houston and Florida State, because Houston got that special little star next to them as the highest ranked team from outside the Power 5 conferences. And Houston only lost 1 game. They lost on the road to UConn without their starting quarterback. And there are a lot of the pundits on TV that would argue that Houston would be sitting here at 13-0 if they hadn't had their quarterback miss that 1 game. I think Florida State historically has been one of those teams that doesn't have bad bowl games. You know, when Alabama got beat by Utah a few years ago, and when they got beat a couple years ago by Oklahoma, all the people in this part of the country were using an excuse, well, they just really weren't into it because they weren't playing for the championship. Yeah. But Florida State historically has been one of those teams that when they played somebody they were supposed to crush in a bowl game. Like, what was it, 3 years ago they played Northern Illinois, and it got ugly early. It got ugly really quickly. One of my students about a year and a half ago did his final paper in a class, and he did a study, and he has the statistical data for the last 20 years. And the last poll of last year is a better indicator of the first preseason poll of this year. And it holds up statistically over the last 20 years. For example, this year, Ohio State would be a 6 because they were number 1 last year, and they were number 7 this year. Ohio State's probably not a good example because they were number 1 in both. Mm-hmm. But for example, on our poll here, our consensus number 2 was TCU, and they ended up 11 or 12.
12, I think.
Yeah, so they'd be a 10. So you guys at home can do the math. Go check the last year's final poll. You can find it very easily on any of the websites, and then go to this year's very first AP poll, or if you want to use the championship poll. But I think the AP poll would be a better indicator of what everybody thought at the beginning of the season. I've always been one of those that argued, if you ask me right now to pick the preseason top 25 in 2050, I probably won't get them in order, but I can probably get at least 23 of the 25 teams correct. Because, it's going to be Oklahoma, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas. Texas will probably make a comeback. Okay, so we have our predictions. I picked Clemson, Ben picked Alabama, and Brett picked Oklahoma. So we'll see how that all works out. We got some 42 bowl games to watch, and we expect our viewers to watch every single one of them and give us a report on what you think is the best one. We actually have a football game of the week, which Brett is the executive director of. It's the college football game of the year, and to get to the college game of the year, we do a game of the week each week, and we do the final college football game of the week is the entire 42 bowl sequence. And everybody, people say, well, it's always going to come down to the championship game. That's not true. One year, our game of the year was one of the games in the first week of the season when Appalachian State beat Michigan in the Big House. So there's been some great games this year. This year's game of the week, or this week's game of the week, was Michigan State's victory over Iowa on that 9-minute and 22-second or whatever it was, 22-play winning touchdown drive. And so we'll see as the bowls come around. Probably after the first week, there'll be one really, really good game, and everybody will be convinced that's going to be the game of the week for the bowls. And then in the second week, there'll be a better one. Brett and I will be going to the GoDaddy Bowl. GoDaddy got combo here at a beautiful Lad People Stadium in downtown Mobile, Alabama. And so everybody enjoy the bowl season. We'll be here next week. We won't be here the week after that as we celebrate the holidays. Everybody have a great holiday season, and we'll talk to you next week at about 11:30 Central Time. We won't be late next week because we don't have any scheduled dissertation defenses. But keep sending in the emails if you guys have any great ideas of what you want to hear us talk about. This week was kind of a no-brainer. with the football playoff. If you have any ideas, I probably can't talk about badminton, but we can probably find somebody in the building who can, if that's what you want us to talk about. Anyway, send us your ideas. Have a great week in sports, and we'll see you next week at 11:30 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday.